Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight to our panel discussion of how to publish your book, Advice for Aspiring Authors. And tonight we have three members of the New England Indie Authors Collective. We're really happy to have Judah Leblang, Randy Ross, and Jason and Rubin join us tonight. I hope you can all hear this. We're going to provide a recording of this at the end of the program. It'll probably be available in a few days, but I wanted to quickly thank the Friends of the Library for sponsoring this program and for Randy, Jason, and Judah for being here, and all of you for coming tonight as well. So thank you very much. And I would like to hand over the baton to Judah, and he can tell you more about tonight's program.
Great. Thank you, Marita. Again, thanks to the Friends of the Somerville Library. And excuse me for a second there. So we want to thank the Friends and Marita and other Somerville Public Library staff who've helped us kind of pull this off. Again, the three of us, Randy Ross, Jason and Rubin, and me, we are members of the New England Indie Authors Collective, a group of local writers and performers. And we all have experience with various aspects of publishing and getting our work out into the world. So the way the program is going to work tonight is we're going to be talking about aspects of kind of how to do it, and some of the experiences we've had and pros and cons of self-publishing and traditional publishing. And but before we get into the program itself, I want to turn it over to Randy, who's just going to do a few little technical tips for how we're going to run the show tonight on Zoom. So Randy.
Great, thanks, Judah. First of all, everybody, you're going to be muted. I'm sorry, it just works better that way. However, if you have any questions at any point during any of the presentations, just enter them in the chat window and we will get to them all at the end. One other tip is in your upper right-hand corner, there should be an option that says view. And if you click on that, you'll have a choice of either gallery view or speaker view. I would recommend you pick speaker view because that means whoever is speaking will be in the largest window of your screen. Gallery view allows you to look and to see what other people are doing, but stick with speaker view and you'll get the best experience. That's
Great.
it.
Okay.
Thanks, Judah.
Thank you. Thanks for those tips, Randy. So the way the program's going to work tonight, basically I'm going to be moderating, and Jason and Randy are going to be sharing their expertise. I'll be filling in and adding some comments. Again, we've all been on various sides of this issue in terms of we've done some self-publishing, we've done some traditional publishing. At least a couple of us have searched for agents and been involved in the process. So first we're going to hear from Jason, who's going to be talking about kind of preparing your manuscript and getting the book ready to send out and approach agents or publishers, or potentially if you're going to self-publish. The bottom line is you've got to get the manuscript ready. Then Randy is going to be talking about looking for traditional publishers and potentially finding an agent. And then we're going to turn it back to Jason to talk about self-publishing. So Jason, you want to lead things off here by talking about finishing the book, which is kind of step one.
Absolutely. Thanks, Judah. Welcome, everybody. I hope you get a lot out of our presentations this evening. Basically, I'm going to talk about 5 tips for completing your manuscript. Now, some of you may already have completed a manuscript. Some may be in the middle of one. My talk is for both groups of people, really, because even when you're done, you're probably not really done. There's always more work you can do. I started my first novel in 2006. I completed the manuscript 3 years later. That is to say, I completed my first draft. And the first thing I did when I reached the end was go back to the beginning and start rewriting. My story was based on a 17th century English folk ballad, and I wanted the narration to sound contemporaneous, as if it were written in that era. What I found was that the style and tone of the narrative had evolved over the course of my writing. It was much more formal and heavily dialectal in the early chapters than in the later chapters. So I had to do a lot of work to make the narrative voice more consistent from beginning to end. And that's something that you may find when you complete your first draft as well. I kept rewriting for the next 3 years, which is how long it took to get a small press interested in publishing it. In that time, I did probably 5 wholesale rewrites. I even added a new final chapter eventually. If it hadn't been published, I would probably still be working on it, and there's nothing wrong with that. It would probably be a better book. Today, I've had 2 books published. The second one was self-published, a third that is waiting for illustrations to be completed, and I'm 50,000 words into a 4th. Along the way, I've learned a few things about getting your manuscript in shape that I want to share with you. I call them the 5 tips for completing your manuscript. Tip number 1, ignore word counts. I know I just told you I'm 50,000 words into my work in progress, and I'm happy about that. But that's not really important. Many people working on their first manuscript started it during NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, which takes place every November. If you haven't heard of it, the goal of NaNoWriMo is to motivate people to finally write that book they've always been meaning to write. From November 1st to November 30th, one is expected to put forth the effort to compose a 50,000-word novel. That comes out to an average of 1,667 words a day for 30 days. My first novel began during NaNoWriMo, but I had a 3-month-old in the house and there was no way I was going to complete it in the course of a single month. But I know a lot of people who do NaNoWriMo every year, and every day they post their daily word counts on social media. To them, a good day is when you write 2,500 to 3,500 words. A bad day is when you write only 250 to 350 words. But the fact is, you could write 5,000 words in a day, but they may suck. When you go through the editing and rewriting process, you might very well delete huge chunks of those words. So it doesn't matter how many words you write, it's how many words you keep. It's not the quantity of your writing, it's the quality. So just write. Start at the beginning, stop when you reach the end. Whatever the word count ends up being, your job is to make it as good as possible, not as long as possible. Second tip, be your own worst critic. You should love writing. Writing should be the best part of your day. You should be in love with the act of writing. That doesn't mean, however, that you should be in love with your writing. It's important to be able to detach yourself and look at what you're writing with a critical eye. Now, don't do this until you're done with your draft. If you stop in the middle and critique yourself, you might never get back to it. But once you've reached the end and look back again at the beginning, you have an important opportunity to review it slightly less subjectively. As you go through every chapter, ask yourself, do I care? Is there anything here that will connect with a reader intellectually or emotionally? Is there pathos, conflict, revelation? Does the chapter advance the story? This is a deeper level of review than just correcting typos, filling in words that were in your mind but somehow never made it to your keyboard, and correcting tenses. That stuff is important, but it doesn't get to the quality of the writing. You need to decide if your story makes sense, if it's compelling. Does each chapter end with something that makes people want to read the next one? If not, think about how to make it better. Remember, when you hire an editor, as you should, they'll gleefully chop it up and suggest radical changes. If you've been truly critical of your work all along, you'll be able to endure and even appreciate their edits better. And hopefully they won't be as extensive as they otherwise might have been. Third tip, put stock in new beginnings. When I completed my draft of my first novel, I showed the first chapter to a friend who is a published author. She loved it, so she said, but she also said I had to change my beginning entirely. That was when I learned of this truism. Delete your first 3 chapters, and then you'll have the true beginning of your story. Now, that doesn't mean you literally have to throw out your first 3 chapters, or even your first one. But writers tend to beat around the bush with their beginnings. Every writer begins their story with one goal: to show off how well they can write, how clever a wordsmith they are. That's not what readers want. They want a good story. And they don't need or want a big writerly build-up to your story. Start where the action is. My original beginning was cinematic, detailing the beautiful green landscapes of Northwest England, the sights, the smells, everything they teach you to do in English class. But movies can start like that because there are titles and credits and music going on while the camera pans along the landscape. Books aren't like that. Once you've opened a book, you're ready to meet the characters and find out what they want, what they're doing, and who's standing in their way. I didn't like changing my beginning, but my book was better for having done so. So look again at your beginning and be sure you've introduced your main characters early and that they're doing something important that drives the action of the story. Tip 4, prepare for rejection. When you send your manuscript to agents and publishers, you will be rejected numerous times, and it will sting. That's the writer's life. As Randy will tell you next, that shouldn't deter you. In fact, you should try to get as many rejections as possible, because that means you're going all out to try to get published. Just keep in mind that they are not rejecting you personally, and they're not even really rejecting your work either. They're rejecting the chance that your book could be very successful. You see, they're not focused on the quality of your story so much as its perceived sense of marketability. If they don't think they can make a lot of money from your work, they won't accept it. But ask yourself, why did you write this book? Was it to make money for other people, or was it to tell a story you've been dying to tell? I'm guessing your answer would be the latter. So if you believe in your story, keep plugging away. In sales, they teach you that every no brings you one step closer to yes. So start collecting no's. Finally, tip 5, keep your eyes on the prize. Writing a book is hard. It takes a long time and everything is against you. Work, home responsibilities, time, energy, endurance, other people's expectations or lack thereof of your ability to write a book and to be a successful author. Writer's block, competing priorities, not to mention pandemics, wars, and heat waves. But don't give up. Let your writing be your lifeline. When the going gets tough, the tough get writing. If you must take a break from writing, clear your mind, go ahead. But plan when you want to get back to it. Don't let it get so far on the back burner that it no longer retains heat. Not because it will hate you for abandoning it. Manuscripts are very forgiving. They will take you back whenever you're ready. Unlike people, they don't hold grudges. No, the problem with letting it lie dormant for too long is that you will lose your momentum, the muscle memory. The creative well you dug may go dry. So keep at it. Keep your eyes on the prize. For those who completed their manuscript and those who will, this is a quote for you. It's from Andre Dubusse III, author of House of Sand and Fog. When you finish a draft of a poem or a short story or novel, you make sure you go out and celebrate all night long, because whether the world ever notices or not, whether you get it published or not, you did something most people never do. You started, stuck with, and finished a creative work, and that is a triumph. So to review, here are the 5 tips for completing your manuscript. Number 1, ignore word counts. Number 2, be your own worst critic. Number 3, put stock in new beginnings. Number 4, prepare for rejection. And 5, keep your eyes on the prize. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, just to build on some things that Jason was saying, one thing I wanted to mention is that we're primarily focused on tonight on the genres that we write in. Jason has written, I would say, mostly historical fiction. Randy has written autobiographical fiction, and I'm a memoirist. So in terms of when we're talking about finishing your manuscript, you may have heard, some people who are doing it like a nonfiction book, a how-to book. something that would be more like narrative nonfiction. Those books can sometimes be sold by developing a book proposal, where you don't necessarily have to write the whole book. You may outline it and prepare a pitch and some sample chapters for an agent. But generally, in terms of book-length fiction and a memoir by relatively unknown writers, you have to write the book. And as Jason said, then the key is to write the best book that you can and to think about what are your goals, basically why are you doing it? And I think Jason's point also about, the idea that, agents and large publishers are going to be looking at the marketability or what they think is the commercial potential of your book. So if and when you get rejected, and I know from personal experience that memoir by a relatively unknown person is a particularly tough sell, it's about, again, the marketability, not necessarily the quality of the writing. So you just, think about why you're doing it, do the work so that when you are pitching your book to agents or publishers or preparing to bring it out via self-publishing, that this is the book that you feel is your best writing at that time. So thank you for reinforcing that, Jason. I think those are great points. So then the next step is once you've finished that manuscript and you've got it to the point after a period of however long it takes, it might be 2 years. For me, it actually took me a total of about 10 years to finish my memoir. And my memoir, speaking of ignoring word count, is under 50,000 words. So it's a short memoir that took me a long time to do. But anyways, once you have the book in good shape and you're ready to get it out into the world, many writers will try to find an agent as their maybe plan A. And then if you do that, I would say it's a good idea to also have a plan B. So Randy Ross is an example of someone who had a plan A, worked it extensively, made a lot of contacts, and then went to plan B, which I guess I would say was more successful than plan A. But he did both very thoroughly. So Randy's going to tell you about his process and give you some tips on how to go through it. So thank you, Randy.
Great. Thanks, Judah. So my section is how to publish your book, focusing on traditional publishing options. So traditional self-publishing, you're publishing the book, you're paying for everything yourself. Traditional publishing, somebody else is doing all the work. They're doing the design, they're doing the layout, they're doing the copy editing, they're doing the editing, they're printing, they're doing all the work. And in many cases, they're going to pay you for the book. You'll get an advance, and advances can range from a few $100s to a few $1 million. So the first thing is everything that I'm mentioning this presentation will be available on my website. This link at the bottom, randyrossmedia.com, publishing-resources. This will be on most of the pages that I'm going to be showing you, and we're also going to email you that link and a link with the actual video from this entire presentation. So just a quick COVID update. Agents and publishers are still looking for books. On the left, we've got, those are industry periodicals talking about book deals that have been done. The most recent one was last week, September 9th. This is a publication called Publisher's Lunch. So 63 deals last week. The month before, 214 deals. Their agents are still signing clients. And down at the bottom, there's a couple of debut authors that just got juicy book deals. However, agents and publishers are very backlogged. So getting responses can take a while. I mean, generally, if you send out a query, submit a query to an agent, you hope to hear back in 6 weeks. Publisher, similar. I have a friend who's been going back and forth with a publisher for 6 months. I spoke to a bunch of agents, and they were like, "Yeah, we're all very backlogged, and it's taking a while for us to get back to things and get back to people." My publisher that purchased my book, I spoke to them in January. My contract with them is they have first right of refusal on my second book. I called them and said, how's it going? And they're like, well, normally we publish 16 books a year. This year, 2021, we're only going to publish 12. Regardless of the backlogs and fewer books being published, I just finished a new book and I'm going to start querying it next week using the processes that I'm going to show you right now. So the odds of getting a book deal. I made up these numbers, but they're based loosely on reality. So a lot of agents will say that they get 100 queries a week. So that's about, and query, we're talking about pitches from authors trying to get an agent to represent them. So that's about 5,000 queries a year. But a large portion of those query letters are not very good. The person didn't finish their manuscript, or they haven't done a good job with the manuscript. They haven't rewritten it enough times. The query letter is not very good. The synopsis that they submit wasn't very good. They're approaching the wrong agents. So a lot of people go about this in a not very scientific, professional way. Small presses. So I'm going to talk about two different things today. One is going after a big press, which means you're going to need an agent. And plan B, as Judah was mentioned, was where you're your own agent and where you contact small presses. The permanent press, the small press that bought my book, they said they get about 500 pitches, query letters a year. And they said about 75% of those are not ready for prime time. So you can increase your odds a lot by doing your homework. So looking for a book deal, it's a lot like job hunting or dating. You want to find a match and then you're going to vet them. The process, you're going to finish your memoir or novel. It's got to be completely finished, as Judah was mentioning. Then you're going to write a query letter, which I'm going to describe in a second, and a synopsis, which I'm also going to describe. So again, if you want a big publisher and the big bucks, you need to get an agent first. If you cannot get an agent, step 2, you're going to be your own agent and you're going to send the book out yourself to small presses. So I did not get an agent. I did not get a big publisher. I went to plan B. I was my own agent. I sent the book out to small presses myself and one of them bought it. So the query letter. My first recommendation, take a class or take multiple classes on how to write this. Typically the classes are taught by agents. This query letter, the one I'm showing you here, this took me 2 years of messing with it and taking classes and showing it to agents until finally a couple of agents said, you know what, this is pretty good. They didn't want the book, but they said the query letter was fine. And a query letter typically has 4 parts. Part 1 is you're letting the agent know why you're contacting them. So maybe the agent is the agent of a friend of yours, so you have a personal reference. Maybe the agent covers a genre that you're writing in. Part 2 of a query letter is you summarize the book. I did it in 1 or 2 sentences, and then say where in the market this book fits in. Because as Jason was mentioning, big publishers, they're looking for marketability. Agents are looking for that as well. The agent is thinking, can I sell this book to a big publisher and get a big advance, because the agent gets 15% of your advance. And the big publisher is like, okay, I'm going to give this person money. We want to make money off this thing. We need to sell a lot of books. So I'm just going to read real quickly my summary. So originally my title for the book, which the publisher didn't like, was The Loneliest Planet. So my pitch was, dear agent, my comedic novel, The Loneliest Planet, offers an unflinching look at how men feel about sex, love, marriage, and massage parlors. The audience includes men seeking insight into their own psyches, women seeking insight into men, and anyone interested in a gritty, bittersweet romantic comedy. So I've summed up what the book is about and potential audiences for it. And then the last sentence, I mentioned other authors that write stuff similar to what I'm writing. The book should appeal to readers of Jonathan Tropper, Joshua Ferris, and Sam Lipsyte. So an agent doesn't need to read any further than that first paragraph to know what kind of book this is, what kind of publishers would be interested in it, and who the potential audience is. Part 3 of the query letter is you summarize what the book is about. And it's got to be pretty short. It's usually 2 to 3 paragraphs. and you want to use the style of writing that you're going to be using in the book. So my book was a comedy. I tried to be funny. Apparently, a lot of agents didn't think it was funny, but one publisher did think it was funny. So my quick summary is the story follows the picaresque adventures of Randall Burns, 48, chronically single and recently downsized out of a long-time job. He blows his severance on a trip around the world, hoping to change his luck with love. So we've kind of set the story in motion. On the trip, Burns strikes out with women on 3 continents and suffers loneliness that would have broken Papillon. So we've got the setup in the first paragraph. The narrator's going on the trip. The story is in motion. And the last paragraph, on the 4th continent, Burns accepts that he's going to die alone, and the sooner the better. He bungee jumps, eats food from street carts, and visits a body spa named the Curious Finger. It goes on, but that's a short synopsis of what the book is like. It's edgy humor that's not for everybody, but it's very clear from this query letter what the book is about, and I'm using the style that I wrote the book in. Part 4 of the query letter is, what are your qualifications for writing this book? I had no qualifications for writing this book, except for the fact that I had taken a 4-month solo trip around the world and had a rotten, miserable time. So I knew the material that I was writing about. The narrator goes on a trip. I went on a trip. I knew all this stuff. I had a couple of short stories published in the world's smallest literary journals. I mentioned those as well, but the bio is not that big of a deal, especially if you're a debut author. So that's the query letter. The synopsis, which is what happens step by step by step by step. This is a excruciating, miserable, horrible process, and I would recommend taking a class. This doesn't have to be as tight as the query letter. A lot of agents don't even read your synopsis, but you're going to need, it's good to have one, because a lot of times you're going to be submitting to an agent. They're going to have some online form that they want you to fill out, and typically the form says query letter, synopsis, and then first 5 pages. So synopsis, take a class, but you need to have it. So now we're going to go agent hunting. So where are you going to find agents appropriate for your book, or agents that will pay attention? First thing, if you have any writer friends, ask them if you can contact their agent. One caveat, you're going to be very surprised at the number of friends or alleged friends who have agents who are not going to help you. They're going to not going to give you their agent's name and allow you to use their name to get to the agent. It's the way it is. So I had friends, some said, yeah, you can use my agent. Some said, basically no. Interesting enough, I was at a party. I'm talking to a guy I barely knew. We're chit-chatting. I mentioned my book. I gave him my pitch, and he said, you can contact my agent. I barely knew this guy. He gave me his agent. So ask. All I can say is no, or I don't want to ever be your friend again. You're going to look for agents of authors that are similar to the types of books you write. I'm going to give you a tool for doing that. Writing conferences. You don't need to go to the writing conferences. There are websites that have lots of lists of writing conferences. If you check the writing conference, there'll be a list of agents that are going to the conference. If the agent is going to a conference, generally that means they are looking for new clients. So what I did is I would look at a conference, I would look at the agent bios, the types of things they're looking for. And if I found an agent that was looking for something like my book, I would send them a query letter. Dear agent, I saw that you're going to be at the XYZ conference, and I saw that you were interested in edgy romantic comedy. I hope you'll consider my book. And then I gave the query letter that I just showed you. The last option, this is the real crapshoot, but there are plenty of databases online that have lists of agents and the genres they cover. So agentquery.com, querytracker.net, poets and writers. So there's hundreds and hundreds of agents, and these will help you narrow it down a little bit because you can sort on what types of things these agents are looking for. So I mentioned you want to be pitching agents of books that are similar to yours. How do you know, of all the books out there, how do you know what other books are similar to yours? Well, I mentioned in my query letter an author, Sam Lipsyte. So this is a website called literaturemap.com. I typed in Sam Lipsyte. It gave me a whole page of authors that this website considers similar to Sam Lipsyte. I did not read all these authors' books. What I did is I looked at the author, I Googled the author, what types of books are they writing? I went to Amazon and looked at descriptions of their books. I read some of their books. A lot of these authors were not a good fit, but some of them were. And the other good thing is it showed an agent that I was familiar with the marketplace and who the competition was. Another place to look for agents that represent authors similar to yours. On any book, there's going to be encomiums. These are other authors that are recommending this particular book. So this is a book by Sam Lipsyte. On the cover, there's a nice quote from Jeffrey Eugenides. I went and looked up Jeffrey Eugenides because I was familiar with some of his books. And I was like, wait a minute, he doesn't do edgy comedy. And I was right. But on the back of this book, there were other authors that also write edgy comedy. So I looked up every one of the authors that had left nice comments or recommendations on this particular book. So you find some authors that are doing books similar to yours. How do you find their agents? This is a website called Publishers Marketplace. $25 a month. You enter the name of the author, and it tells you who the agent is. It's worth the $25 a month. So this is an author, Ed Park, who also does edgy comedy, and I found his agent, PJ Mark at Janklow and Nesbitt. Another place to look for agents. There's a tool called mswishlist.com. MS stands for manuscript. So these are agents and they're posting what they're looking for. So there'll be individual agents with their posts, and on the right side, there's a list of genres, and you click on that and you can see what agents are looking for these particular types of books. So there's humor. Supposedly there were 378 agents looking for humor. I didn't find 378 that were looking for humor, but anyway, this is another good tool for finding agents that are interested in the type of book that you're writing. Vetting the agents. Again, Publishers Marketplace. One thing you can look at is deals. How many deals has this agent done within the last couple of years? Are they active, or do they just have their name up on this website and they're not doing much? And you also might want to check, are they taking any debut authors? So again, Publishers Marketplace, a good way to look at what the agent has been up to. Another way of vetting agents, there's a website, Writer Beware, and this has lists of agents that their members have had bad experiences with. So there's a whole list of agents and types of things to look for when you're looking for an agent, things to avoid. Querying tips. Okay, you got your query letter. You've got your synopsis. Your manuscript was finished a while ago. Now it's time to start sending out query letters. Sending out 100 to 200, contacting 100 to 200 agents is not out of the question. What I did was I was sending out 10 at a time. I sent it out to 110 agents, and I'm going to tell you why I picked that number. So I sent it out to 10 at a time. I would send out 10. I would wait a week, send 10 more. After 6 weeks, if I hadn't heard from the agent, I would email them and say, oh, I hope this didn't get caught in your spam filter. I wanted to make sure you got my query letter. Typically, if an agent's not interested, they're not going to respond. Once in a while, they don't get your query letter. So I had 2 agents that I did this with, and they said, oh, I didn't see the query letter. Send me the manuscript. So you want to do some follow-up. This process of sending it out to 110 agents, it took me 6 months, but I was doing 10 a week. I would do it in the morning. It would take, maybe take an hour, because again, I had a spreadsheet that I'd gone through that had a list of all these agents. I had their email address, any other contact info, and then I would just tweak the query letter and email it to them. Okay, you do not get an agent. Bummer, it didn't happen. It didn't happen to me. Step 2, you're going to be your own agent, and you're going to send your book out yourself to small presses. So big publishers do not take queries directly from agents in general. Small presses, a lot of them do take queries from authors. So one place to start looking for small presses, Poet and Writers, Poets and Writers, they have a database. You can enter your genre, comedy, historical fiction, whatever it is, and you'll find a list of small presses. Vetting small presses. Again, writer beware. This website, they've got lists of publishers that have been a problem for their members. So you can go through this and you can see whether this particular publisher has been a problem. My process. So this book, I started writing in 2007. I got laid off from my job. I took a 4-month solo trip around the world. And as I mentioned, I had a rotten, horrible, miserable time, but I'm a writer and I kept the blog the whole time. And when I got back, I had 120 pages of blog material, 120 pages of kvetching and moaning and moaning and kvetching. And I decided I wanted to turn this into a book. So I started writing it in 2007. I finished in 2015. So I rewrote it numerous times. It started off as a travel memoir, then it was a memoir, and finally it was a novel. So I finished it in 2015. Jason said, don't pay attention to the word count, but when you're finished with the book and you're sending it out to agents, you do need to pay attention to the word count. For a standard commercial novel, commercial fiction, like my book, we want to be between 75,000 and 95,000 words. My book was 80,000 words. That's 325 Microsoft Word pages. So I queried 110 agents. I was going to query 120. I queried 110, 7 agents liked my query letter, requested the manuscript, and then rejected it. I was going to do 120, and the way I got that number was I was at a writer's conference. I was talking to an agent, and I asked him, so how many agents should I query with this thing? And the agent said, well, I have a client that queried 120 agents, and I was number 120. And the book, the agent liked the query letter. They sold the book, and the book became a movie. And the name of the book was The Silver Linings Playbook. So I was going to do 120. I got to 110, and I was like, you know what? I don't think this is going to happen. So I started contacting small presses. I queried 15 small presses, and the Permanent Press was actually at the bottom of my list. Whenever you're looking up an agent or a publisher, you want to go to their website and see what their requirements are. The Permanent Press, they do not want email queries. They want you to send paper. They want your query letter, and they want the first 20 pages, and they want paper. So these guys were at the bottom of my list, but they had a good reputation. They published 16 books a year, which is a good size for a small press. So eventually, I sent them what they asked for, a query letter and the first 20 pages. A week later, they said, send us the rest of the manuscript. Paper, please. So I had to print out 325 Microsoft Word pages and mail it to these guys. A month later, they called me and said, we love your book. We're going to offer you $1,000 advance. And they also sent me a contract. And that contract, so the advance was $1,000. I got the contract. It was only 2 pages long, but I'm kind of a nervous, anxious type. And I was like, no, you know what? I'm going to show this to a lawyer. So I showed it to a lawyer. The lawyer charged me $350 to look at 2 pages, but I felt better afterwards because the lawyer said, yeah, basically this is fine. But the other thing with the contract was this letter from the publisher. And it's kind of a reality check on what it's like out there. Dear author, before you sign your contract, we wanted you to know what the book world is like. Generally speaking, books by non-celebrities sell between 700 and 1,500 copies. To even ensure that many sales, it is imperative that the pre-publication reviews be good ones. So my book was supposed to come out March 2017. In November 2016, the Permanent Press sent out copies to dozens of reviewers. In January, I got a call from the publisher. He was not happy. My book had not been reviewed. So the publisher said, you can keep the $1,000. We're going to do an ebook, but there's going to be no physical book. And I was in tears. I begged, I pleaded. And the publisher said, I'm sorry, no reviews. no book. 2 weeks later, I get a call from the publisher. He's in a very good mood. My book got reviewed by Kirkus. It got reviewed by Booklist. So there was a book. So the book was supposed to come out March 2017. The actual books were not available until May 2017, but I got my book. And now Jason's going to talk to you about self-publishing.
I actually kind of wanted to jump in for a minute here. So you can spotlight me. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to say that related to, yeah, the process in terms of looking for small press. I used Poets and Writers, also the Associated Writing Programs, which is a lot of academics go to those conferences. AWP, it's a huge, huge conference with, I think a lot of time, they get like around 15,000, or pre-COVID, like 15,000 attendees. And there are a bunch of mid-size and small presses that participate in AWP. And so that's an example where if you can get, if you participate in the conference, or even if you can get the conference catalog, you can get the names of a lot of small presses that are looking for, and you can find out kind of what they specialize in. So for me, I was shopping my memoir around. In my case, I queried, I'd say 60 to 65 agents. And 2 of them wanted to look at the full manuscript, and neither one of them subsequently took the book. And so then I started looking at small presses, and I kind of worked my way down. And my press was considerably smaller than Randy's. Basically a one-man operation. It was a guy that I met personally at a writers conference in Cleveland, which is my hometown. So I guess one thing I'd say is if you can make actual contact with somebody from a press, you might, that can always help. Any kinds of personal contact also can be true with agents sometimes, but, and smaller presses, one thing I'll say, I found that mid-sized presses and university presses will often publish. They'll often have areas of specialization. So I sent my manuscript, my memoir, to Ohio State University Press and Kent State University Press, because a lot of the action of my story took place in Ohio. And basically what I got from both of those presses were very supportive rejections, where they said, we like the book, we think it should be published, but it's not really Ohio enough for us. It's not Ohio-centric. I sent it to Gallaudet University Press because a lot of it is about my uncle who is deaf and my experiences in the deaf community. And I think for them, it wasn't deaf enough. So the thing is, some small presses, they'll just publish what they like. I didn't get in advance, but one thing I did do was when I got this standard contract from the publisher, and there were a number of things in there that didn't sound right to me. Through the Authors Guild, I think membership in the Authors Guild costs about $100, $125 a year. And they had a service where they would do an initial reading of your contract and give you advice. I got advice from a lawyer at the Authors Guild who basically said there are some things here that are not kosher, and that you should change these or find another publisher. So I went and basically changed those things and found the publisher was very flexible around that. But it's important, I think, to have somebody, a lawyer preferably, look at your contract. So anyways, yeah, one thing about small presses is you have to do a little research and find out what they specialize in, because you don't want to waste their time or look like you're uninformed. So that's part of the homework that you'll be doing. So yeah, we talked about various forms of traditional publishing, and now Jason is going to talk about his experiences in self-publishing. And again, I'll have a few things to add. My first book, which was a memoir collection, basically an essay collection that reads like a memoir, was also self-published. So Jason, you want to fill us in?
Absolutely, Judah. So, as Randy basically said, plan A could be to get an agent, go after a large publishing house. Plan B would be to forget the agent and go directly to a small press. Plan C for most people would be self-publishing. And I just want to use a few minutes to sort of promote and uplift the concept of self-publishing. Some years ago, the very idea of self-publishing was so anathema to writers that many saw it as completely illegitimate, a sign of failure. Only if you were good enough to be accepted by an agent or a publisher did your book count. That idea presupposed that agents and publishers are legitimate gatekeepers, the only ones with the expertise to judge good from bad. But the reality is that they are hustling for their lives. The publishing industry is going the way of the newspaper business. Houses are going out of business. They're publishing fewer books, as Randy said, and their margins for error are as slim as their appetite for risk. As I said before, they don't care about your book unless they can make money off it. That means they need books with characters and plots that a lot of people would care about. A few years ago, that meant vampires and espionage stories. And also, Randy, not so much correcting me, but while you're writing, ignore the word counts. But it's true that publishers, large and small, want books of a certain size so that they can charge a certain price for them that hopefully will lead to profits. So you see, it's not about quality as much as it is about flooding the market with more of the same. Look, no one writes books for agents and publishers. We write books in the hope of attracting like-minded people who would appreciate a good story, well told, even if that's only 1,000 people. And that's where self-publishing comes in. This type of thing has already transformed the music business. It used to be that if a major label dropped a band, that band broke up and became guitar teachers. They were out of the business. Now bands record themselves, produce their own CDs, and sell them directly to their fans. The indie revolution completely changed the model for making and selling music. In that example, the label heads are just like agents and publishers. They think they provide a service when in reality they are unnecessary, unhelpful buffers between artists and audiences. As I mentioned earlier, I spent 3 years trying to get an agent or a publisher to take on my first book. Eventually, I found a small Midwestern press. Then a couple of years ago, I looked at myself as a 50-something with a second book in the can, and the mere thought of going through all those submissions and all those rejections was exhausting. In fact, I think I had PTSD just from listening to Randy's presentation. I mean, I was older now, and I'm still older. I didn't want to take the time. So I went the self-publishing route. And in a mere few months, I had a very attractive book for sale, voila. One that was listed and is listed on Amazon and other online outlets. Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass was self-published. So was The Martian and 50 Shades of Grey. The Martian actually started out as a blog. If you hustle, you can find your audience. It's not like publishing houses are going all out with huge advances in marketing budgets these days anyway. True story. This summer, I had dinner with a 96-year-old former professor of physics at Rutgers, who was born in Germany and came to the US in the 1930s as Hitler rose to power. He wrote a memoir and self-published it. Why? Because he wasn't going to live long enough to go the traditional route, even though he likely could have interested a university press in his very compelling story. So ask yourself, do you want to spend your time writing books or writing submissions? I'd rather write books. That's why I'm a proponent of self-publishing. Now that said, there are some pros to traditional publishing. For one, it's not fair, but it is true that trade-published books tend to have higher prestige than self-published books, which can also help you to get public readings and teaching gigs. Also, they are more likely to be distributed through bookstores and libraries, though that's not always guaranteed. And yes, they pay advances, but then you have to sell in excess of the advance to make any future money. There may even be some marketing dollars thrown your way, which is nice. When you self-publish, every sale is reliant on your own sales and marketing efforts. So here are the pros and cons of both methods. Self-publishing, yes, it will get published, but you'll have to pay for it. Yes, you'll have creative control. Randy told you that a publisher made him change the title of his book. But that control could be for better or for worse. You know, I mentioned the importance of having an editor. You know, just doing it on your own and putting it out there is no guarantee of quality. You need to, it's good to have somebody who can weigh in on it, somebody with some expertise. Yes, you'll earn more per sale, but the sales will be piecemeal. You'll have to work for every book you sell. And it is indeed much, much faster. But that means you need to start selling more quickly. Are you ready to do that? Are you ready to start selling your book? Now, the pros and cons of traditional publishing. As I said, more prestige, more bragging rights, but it is a long, slow process. We are talking years. Just getting an agent could take you a couple of years. Then they have to sell it to a publisher. That takes time. Then the publisher has to go through the effort of publishing it, and they may decide to hold it for a certain season. Broader distribution, but like I said, no guarantee of sales. I mean, how many people are really going to bookstores these days? So whether your book is in a bookstore or not, how many people are actually going to see it? Financial advances, they are nice, but again, it takes longer to earn royalties because, you know, if they give you $1,000 in an advance, then you have to earn that money, that amount of money, in order to start earning your royalties. An advance is an advance. You have to pay them back. And the marketing budget, yes, that can be nice, but don't expect to get on the Today Show. It doesn't mean you're going to get in the New York Times review of books. It's still up to you to sell your book, regardless of whether you go self-publishing or traditional publishing. Again, thank you for listening.
Thanks, Jason. That was great. And I guess I would add a little bit just because, yeah, I self-published my first book and traditionally published the second. And there's more gray area between the two than you might think, especially for someone like me, where my traditional publisher, yeah, basically I got the credibility of somebody taking my book, but he's a one-man operation with no marketing budget. He wasn't getting my book into bookstores. I pretty much have had to do all the marketing and a fair amount of the editing. So, and I've actually heard this from other writer friends who've been published by, say, university presses, that they don't typically have much of any real budget for marketing. And so if you get published by a small press, you're going to have to do a lot of the same things that you would do if you were self-publishing. One thing that is nice about traditional publishing, even very small publishing, is that you don't have to front the money. When I published my first book, self-published, I ended up fronting about $2,000 by, you know, I had to get the ISBN number, the barcode, you know, and a lot of other expenses, you know, business cards and various other things. And also I was like a project manager. So I took the book and I had somebody lay it out in InDesign. I had somebody else copy edit the book, even though in my day job, I did a lot of editing. So I chose to basically manage the project, which cost me money because I had to pay the people who were doing that work. There are some organizations, places like BookBaby that may do a lot of that for you. I don't know if iUniverse is still around. Some of those organizations, companies, you can look at the book and you can sometimes tell that it's a self-published book by looking at things like the way it's centered on the page rather than done in a way where you can look at the gutter of the book or the way things are laid out. And I wanted a book that was basically going to look like it was published by a traditional press. So, I found people I knew to do the work. and I think it came out at a certain level of quality, but every step of the way, I had to manage the project and it cost me money. So eventually I sold about 1,000 copies of that book, which is considered pretty good for a memoir. But it took me a while to say break even. And it was a huge amount of work to manage that project. So, you know, another thing about self-publishing is you own the process, and you got to ensure that there's a certain level of quality that you're going to be comfortable with. And honestly, for me, with the small press that brought out my second book, I had to do a lot of the same things. So again, there's a lot of, I think, bleed over between small presses in traditional publishing and self-publishing. So anyways, we've covered a lot of territory, and you know, you've heard from our experiences. So we really wanted to open it up for questions, comments. One question that I see in chat from Bev is, why do you think the publishing industry is suffering so much? Is it because of electronic books? So I don't know, Jason, you want to jump in on that, or Randy maybe first?
I think that I think there's electronic everything is hurting the industry. I think people spending more time on the internet, people, you know, just gaming and what have you. You know, I can tell you one thing that, you know, with my current arrangement with my self-publisher, you know, I get a certain amount if they purchase a physical book. If they get the Kindle version of the book, I make like a quarter, you know, like 25 cents. So I think that part of the risk of that is that people are turning to electronic books, which is sort of easier to put out, but you know, you're not going to make any money on that. But I think at the same time, the pandemic, a lot of people were forced to be home and not doing anything. And I think people sort of rediscovered books, probably books on their bedside table that they had been meaning to get to and didn't. And now that libraries are starting to open up again, like the Somerville Library, hopefully people are getting out and reading more, and hopefully that will spark the industry and people will start buying more books.
Yeah, I think the issue is, yeah, people just haven't been reading as much. Yeah, they read tweets and small snippets of stuff, but sitting down with a 300-page book is just something people are doing a lot less of. And again, as Jason mentioned, during the pandemic, actually book sales spiked, but a lot of those book sales were nonfiction, how-to type stuff, and also books from big name authors. I didn't see my book sales spike. I don't know, maybe you guys did.
After tonight, hopefully.
Yeah, I didn't. It didn't do anything for my book sales. But if you look at the industry numbers, book sales were up for big publishers and big name authors.
Yeah, I guess I would just say, I think people in general, I mean, the Boston area, I think is quite literate, and people read. But to be honest, I think even of my friends, my non-writer friends, I have friends who probably don't sit down and read a book for pleasure in a year, maybe one book a year. And they're reading tons of articles on the internet, they're reading things on their phone, but they're not actually, you know, going out and buying books. So it is, I think, a more challenging time. I think people have short attention spans. And even now, you know, when we're still in some version of COVID, the COVID era, a lot of people are pressed for time. And like Randy said, they're not necessarily going to curl up with a 300-page or even a 160-page book like mine. It's quite challenging, I think. So, you know, wondered if other folks had, you know, if you had other questions, you know, wherever you are in the process, you know, what you might be thinking about, wondering about. Don't be shy. And you can unmute if you want to just, ask a question, and hopefully we'll try to come up with an answer.
How else, or where else besides Poets and Writers Magazine to research small presses, I guess, is one question, and what steps to vet them? Because I'm thinking that might be a route I go.
I mean, you can also just Google top small presses, and you'll get. What I did is I looked at a bunch of different lists to find which publishers had won awards, had been in business for a long period of time, were putting out large numbers of books, and those were the ones that were at the top of my list. So yeah, there's all kinds of lists of small presses, but as far as vetting them, you want to see, how long have they been in business? One thing I tried, which wasn't helpful, but I looked around. So when I was considering the permanent press after I got my offer, I looked at other authors that had books published by the permanent press. I contacted one author on LinkedIn, and he was like, "Yeah, they're fine." But yeah, writer beware is a good spot for that. There used to be something called Predators and Editors. They have a page on Facebook. They're hoping to bring back their website, but that was another good place where they had, complaints or publishers that were problematic.
I mean, I guess another thing is to just in terms of finding small presses that would be, say, interested in publishing memoir, for example. I would say use your local library. There are directories of literary presses, and I'm blanking on. There's one that I used years ago that wasn't. I didn't want to buy the volume because it was like $20, but they had it at Somerville Library, and so you can in their reference section.
Yeah, Writers Market used to do that. I don't know if they're still doing it.
I think that's what it is, and we do have it at the reference desk at all the libraries.
West Branch too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I used Writers Market, but there was also some other directory of like literary and small presses, and I forgot the exact title, but I think they had it at Somerville Main Library. You might be able to find it online as well. But yeah, there are so many small presses, and like again, a press like mine, it's called Red Giant Books. I mean, nobody outside of Cleveland would have heard of it, and lots of people in Cleveland probably haven't heard of it. But it's like, I think that with smaller presses, again, you get that the legitimacy of, okay, somebody chose my book, which was not me, you know what I mean? Like, and it can be helpful sometimes in maybe if you want to teach, or I think it does give you a little more credibility. But for like when I was with my first book, which was self-published, I was able to get it into like bookstores in Cleveland and Boston simply by saying it's available through Ingram. Ingram is the largest book distributor in the US, or was. I don't know where Amazon fits right now. So bookstores can get it through Ingram, then they'll often carry the book. But the flip side there, what I've learned is just to have it in a bookstore, if it's just going to sit there, it doesn't necessarily translate into sales. And if you're a self-published author, bookstores generally want your book to be returnable, which means if it doesn't sell, they return it and they get a credit. So it basically costs them nothing. So it costs you, the author, when that happens, because the distributor will destroy your book and charge you, or they will like charge you for the mailing costs. I mean, I learned that it wasn't worth it for me as a self-published author to have it in bookstores unless I knew that bookstore was actually going to be selling some copies of my book. Now with my publisher, You know, it's in a few bookstores, and I don't have to worry about, you know, being, you know, it's not going to really, it's not going to cost me directly. Although if I earn some money through sales and then people, you know, they return the book, the publisher will kind of charge that against my earnings. So that's an interesting thing too. It's the whole book business it's quite tricky because the bookstore, yeah, and the bookstore, you know, gets it at a discount. Everybody, you know, has to make money out of the deal. So it's actually the author tends not, it's not easy. Whether you self-publish or traditionally publish, for most of us, don't quit your day job. That's what I would say. But that's a good question. We have a question from Deepak. If you are a first-time writer, do you have any advice on getting independent assessment feedback on your book? Do you advise hiring someone? I would say definitely yes, even if you're not a first-time writer, as Jason was saying, and I know Randy also does this, you know, to have, you know, we need feedback. I had a friend of mine who was a very accomplished writer look at an early draft of my book. I paid him to do so. I have another writer friend who is also an editor who did a close reading of my book. Yeah, I think that a combination of, you can work with a consultant one-on-one, taking classes is also can be very helpful. Doing maybe participating in some kind of a writing workshop. There's lots of ways to do it, but I think getting feedback is an important part of the process. It's very hard to edit our own work.
Yeah. Actually, what I did is I was taking classes down at Grub Street, which is where Judah teaches. And in one of my classes, one of the other students, her comments on my writing were so good. I ended up hiring her, and I've been working with her for, wow, over 10 years. And I pay her by the hour. But the whole thing is I trust her. We have the same sense of humor. If she says, hey, this is not funny, or, you know, I trust her comments, and we just, you know, we'll discuss it and fix it. Or, you know, sometimes I'll just say, you know what, I'm the writer. I like it. Let's move on. But yeah, so I have someone that I pay. And I met her in a class, and she wasn't even the instructor. It was just another student. The other thing is,
yeah.
The other thing is, every time I finish a draft, I send it out. I'll have like 5 or 6 people read the manuscript. You know, this is outside of the woman that I have that I hired, and each person I'll pay $100. I'll send them a list of questions that I want answered, and I'll give them a deadline. And the fact that I'm paying them $100 means they generally finish it on time. They answer all the questions. I have friends that, you know, just have people read it, and, you know, their friends or people they know, and if they're not paying them, you know, they can't really pester them too much. It's like, yeah, you're doing me a huge favor. You're reading 300 pages of my work, and I really appreciate it. But if you're paying them something, then they've got some little more incentive.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I mentioned that I sent my my initial manuscript to a friend of mine who is a published author, different genre, more fantasy, sci-fi, but she's a brilliant author, and, you know, she gave me really, really good advice that I, you know, absolutely felt confident in because of her own success. But also, you know, I belong to a writers group in Malden where I live. And so you can, you know, submit chapters to the group and get feedback, you know, on pieces of your story. And it was in that writers group that you know, one of the members just reads me so well, and it would come up, not just like edit the draft, which she's good at doing that as well, but she just comes up with ideas. She just understands the story and the nature of the story. And she says, the thing that's missing here is boom. And she can identify that. And so I do pay her. That's important. And it's really valuable, you know, I mean, show it to your family, show it to your friends, but find somebody, and you can Google and try to find editors in your area, but try to find someone, you know, who has some expertise in that.
Yeah, and I guess I would just say, particularly for memoir writers, don't show it to your family. At least not till you're very far along in the process, because unlike fiction, well, it can happen with fiction too, where somebody will be like, well, I know you, this is really me. I'm Aunt Joan in this and I'm offended. Or why didn't you put me in this or whatever. But in memoir, you can't hide behind those veils. And people will often give feedback that has nothing to do with the quality of the writing, but instead the baggage that they're bringing to the, to the situation. So I always tell, my students and writers I work with to be very protective, of your work, because you want the feedback to be about the writing and not about you as a person. And that's where getting feedback in the way that Randy and Jason are suggesting, from a professional or from an accomplished writer, whether they make a living at it or not, is a good idea. Laura mentioned Grub Street, and as Randy said, I've been teaching there for about 15 years. And I see a couple of my former students are here. It's always nice to see. I'm excited because I'm starting to see some of my students' books coming out. It's very cool. But a lot of instructors at Grub Street work with people one-on-one. And if you go to their website, you can see what these consultants specialize in. So you can read their bio and get a sense of, what their work is like, what their interests are, to get a sense of whether you think there'd be a good fit. And you pay them basically by the hour. And, if you try someone for an hour or two or a few hours, maybe it's not the right fit, then you can find somebody else. But Grub Street is a good resource. So thank you for mentioning that. Jean had a question. If you write a memoir, do you absolutely have to have permission from those you write about, even if it's positive? Well, in my memoir, a number of the key characters are dead, which gives you a lot of freedom. But I'm obviously not suggesting that you facilitate their passing or anything like that.
Step one.
No, I don't think that you need. You don't need necessarily formal permission. What I did in my case was I changed the names of several family members, not particularly because I was writing anything overly negative, but I changed the name of my two brothers, for example. Now, anybody who knows me or knows my family would know who I'm referring to in the book. But I just did that because I felt like it was a little more respectful of their privacy. And I have a disclaimer at the front of the book indicating that I changed names of some characters in the book. I think you have the right to tell your story. Everybody has to make that decision individually as to, how do they do it, and do they show the book, say, ahead of time to family members or things like that. There's a book by Mary Carr, who wrote The Liars Club and some other memoirs. And she has a book called The Art of Memoir. And she goes into that whole issue of, because she writes about her family and, says some difficult things. And she writes about kind of how she navigated that with her mother and her sister, who were alive at that time. But I think different writers do it differently. It's something we struggle with. But I would say that until your manuscript is done, try not to worry about that too much, because I find that sometimes people really hamstring themselves by worrying about what would their niece say or what would their adult daughter say, and then they freeze up and then they can't tell their story. So it's a tricky situation, but yeah, thank you, Laura, for posting that in chat. The Art of Memoir. I mean, there are many books on writing where they will touch on that. My own belief is, at some point, I think we have the right to tell our stories. That doesn't mean that we disregard everybody in our lives, but I think there are ways to do it where you can tell your truth and do it respectfully, but not necessarily paint other characters as a villain, because most individuals are not black and white. We're more complex characters. And even if you're writing about maybe some negative experiences, you can do it in a way which is still, I think, presenting the character as human rather than as a just all negative. So so we've covered a lot of territory, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I think we're gonna wrap it up. But again, thank you all for coming. Randy will be sending you a follow-up email with the references that we've touched on in our presentation tonight. And he'll also include links to our websites if you want to check out our books. And so, yeah, it's been great to be with you tonight. I want to wish you good luck. I want to thank you again, thank Marita and Somerville Library and the Friends of the Library for hosting us. And yeah, please also check out NEIAC, NEIAC.org. We have samples of our work, and when we have upcoming events, they're posted there as well. So thank you, and have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Judah. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Josh. I'm sorry, Randy. I'm sorry.
Good night,
Have a
John.
good evening. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Good to see you.
Bye.
Yeah, everyone.
Thank you for coming.
Good to see you all. Thank you. Thank you, Judah.
See you, Laura. Thank you. Nice
Be
to
well,
see you.
everyone.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Well done. Well done.
Thank you.